and welcome to the Paragon of Play podcast. I am your host, Jessica Spice, and this is episode 1. Today we have Lisa Murphy joining us from the United States. She's a play advocate, and Lisa has authored 5 books, has hosted countless seminars and workshops, and is the founder and CEO of Ooey Gooey Inc. Welcome, Lisa. It's great to have you.
Well, thank you so much.
Great. So, Lisa, you have been working for a long time in the field of early education and play. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in presenting these workshops and seminars across multiple countries?
Sure. Some people call it the Dallas story. And if I'm feeling overly dramatic, it can take 20 minutes, but I won't bore your listeners. But really what ended up happening, I was an early childhood educator at the time. Well, I am, but at the time I was a family child care provider. You guys call them family day homes. And I was living in San Diego, and it was 1996. And I'm guessing quite a few of your listeners probably weren't even born yet.
I was 6 at the time.
And I attended my very first training seminar ever. And I mean, like it was the NAYC, National Association for the Education of Young Children. And I flew from San Diego to Dallas, Texas, and I was all excited and going to workshops, and I'd never been before. And Thursday morning, there was a workshop being offered that I honestly don't remember the name, but the long story short was that the woman who was supposed to give the workshop said she was going to give you 101 new activities for your sensory table tub, and she was going to give you a handout. And back in the day, all you youngins that are listening, handouts would cause stampedes at a conference. Nobody had a website. You couldn't download anything. There were no QR codes to link you to something. Like, this woman was going to give you the recipes. And so wow, everybody wanted to be there. So I get there an hour before it's supposed to start. The room is full. I push and shove my way in. I pretend I know somebody there. I don't know anybody in there. I go to the front. There's a woman there with all of her stuff next to her. And she's like, I'm saving the spot for a friend. And I'm like, no, you're not. And she's like, you're right. So I sat down next to her, and we started talking. And then we're talking to the people next to us, the people behind us. And then we're like, we've been talking to each other for a while. Like, when does this start? And I kid you not, like at that moment, somebody walked in from the conference. She had on a suit, she had a name tag, a walkie-talkie. And we were like, oh my God, what's happening? What's the matter? What's going on? And she stood up. There was like 700 people in this room. And she was behind the podium, and she looked at everybody, and she's like, hi, we don't know where your speaker is. And you're like, what? She's like, but let's give her a few more minutes, right? Because maybe she's lost, or maybe she's late. Yeah. And the reality is that she's not there. For whatever reason, she's not there. And one of the things I like to remind people is that, at big conferences like that, when we all used to gather together, in large groups, there's 20 sessions happening at the same time. So at the end of the day, are we disappointed? Yes. Are there other choices? Yes. So everybody's like flipping through the big book, what should we go to? What should we go to? And the lady I was sitting next to, I looked at her, and I don't remember her name, but she was from Colorado. And I said, I think maybe I could do this. And she put the book down. And by the book, I mean like the conference, the topics, all the workshops that were happening. She closed it, and she looked at me, and she's like, do what? And I said, I could get up there and share activity ideas with everybody. I think that'd be kind of fun, actually. And she looked at me, and she said, I dare you. And I looked at her, and I got up on the stage, and I looked at all of these people. And I was like, hello, I'm Lisa Murphy, and I'm not your presenter. I'm not even supposed to be here. I don't have anything. I don't have a handout. I don't have activities. I got nothing. I said, but I was expecting to receive a lot of new ideas today. Is that why you are also here? And people are like, yeah, stuff to do on Monday. And I said, you know what? Here's the deal. I can share with you things I've done. You can write them down. You can yell out things you've done. We can all write them down. You can leave, honestly. I mean, truthfully, I don't care. I don't got a dog in this fight, But if you want to stick around, we can have a sharing session, and, then we can all leave with a little bit more tools in our tool belt. And they all came back, and they all sat back down. And for the next hour, no joke, I barfed out everything at the time I knew how to do, how to make Play-Doh, how to make flubber, how to make clean mud, like all these recipes that were in my head. I just barfed them all out. They wrote them down. They're screaming, they're yelling, they're clapping. They're asking me if I got a book, and I'm like, a book? Yeah, I don't even have a handout, right? And the reason that I share a little bit of that Dallas story, both with you because you've asked, but also when I do workshops out on the road, is because I think it's really important for people to know how I got to this spot. I mean, I had people, they were offering me jobs. They wanted to come tour my school. They were crying. This one lady rushed the stage. She's like, this is the best thing I've ever been to in my life. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I just made this up. And that was the big takeaway, was that, you know, when you see 700 grown, probably at the time, mostly women, crying over a Play-Doh recipe. And I'm thinking, my gosh, you know, what if I actually like put some time and effort and energy into really crafting something? And that's what ended up happening. I mean, I had no intention of ever being a speaker or an author, but seriously, you see 700 grown adults crying over, you know, Play-Doh and flubber recipes. I think there might be a business opportunity in that. And and that's what happened. That's what I did. So I grabbed the opportunity and I ran with it. And the next year, 1997, I started the company. And that's, I mean, the long story, not short, but that's what happened. And I get to go all over the world. At least I did. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, COVID kind of brought that to a screeching halt, and not to get derailed by that. But that's what I do, whether it's now on Zoom or whether it's in big conference halls. My overarching message is making sure that we are creating places that are developmentally appropriate, relationship-based, and play-based. And then the loving, more individual reminder is that we're not going to be able or willing to put the time into creating those places if we have forgotten why we do this work. And so I really think it's important to always come back to your why, because that will guide you.
Yeah, and that's awesome. It's wild to think that one little split-second decision kind of launched you into
100%.
a big journey.
Like, I have a spiel in case the woman was from Florida, which is funny because that's where I live now. And she didn't show up. And I've always said that if I ran into her for whatever reason, I'd be like, shake your hand. Like, I don't know why you weren't there. I hope it wasn't something amazingly traumatic, but you changed the trajectory of my entire, for the most part, adult life. I mean, I was in my early 20s at that juncture. I mean, and so for the last 30 some odd years, or well, with the workshops, 20 some odd years, I mean, because that woman didn't show up.
That it changed everything. Yeah.
It changed everything.
Yeah. And I do wonder if a lot of times for the participants, I know when I saw you at the Challenging Behavior Conference, it kind of changed a little bit about my plans going forward as an educator. I bet you kind of changed the trajectory of some people's careers just with, you know, the way that you're spreading your ideas and the way that you're spreading information about play. And I think that's really neat to see how excited people get about listening to you and reading what you write and hearing what you have to say.
That is very nice. Thank you very much. That's a lot of complimenting. So I do appreciate that. I will share, if you don't mind, I actually had a principal of an elementary school come up to me after a gig and told me that they were now going to go back to the classroom, that they realized that they had, you know, and it's no disrespect to the choices that they had made, but I mean, that was huge for me to have a principal come up and say, I'm going back to the classroom now after hearing you speak. That was amazingly powerful. I've had people say that they've quit after hearing me speak because they realized that they were done and that they needed to move on and do something different. And both are very powerful in their own ways. Yes.
Yeah. So a lot of what you talk about has to do with play being the foundation of learning. And I can't bring up the graphic right now, but you have this concept of, what would you call it, the house of learning with play as the foundation. Could you speak a little bit on that?
Sure. I find the house metaphor, the construction metaphor, to be very easily visualized, if that makes sense. It wasn't anything that I sat down and really planned. You know, I didn't like consult with a marketer or, you know, anything like that, a designer. I really started thinking about, what are we doing with the kids every day? How come the behavior problems have gone away? What are we doing? And so I think the foundation concept came first, that we're making time every day to do 7 things. And I know you have read the book, and I'm sure some of your listeners have also read the book, and I thank you very much for that. Lisa Murphy on Play is the revised edition. And in the book, I outlined the 7 things, which are, I'll say them slow: create, move, sing, discuss, observe, read, and trick question. Play, no, not a question, quick trick statement. Play is not a separate seventh thing, right? It's the cement holding that metaphorical foundation together. So in your brain, if you could imagine like a foundation, like a long rectangle, and in that rectangle is we're making time to do creating and moving and singing and discussing, observing and reading. And play, if you draw like a blanket around that rectangle, that's the cement holding our foundation together. And then on top of that, we build, as you said, the house of it depends on what resonates with your listeners. Some people like the house of academics. Some people like the house of higher learning. It doesn't matter to me which one you use, as long as it works for you. But the idea that you're building a house on top of it. So that house, the reading, the writing, math, science, chemistry, physics, know your name, know your shape, know your colors. There's nothing wrong with expecting an absolutely huge academic mansion. But where we're getting into trouble is that a lot of early childhood people are being expected, whether they're really being expected or whether they think they're being expected, right? Because there's a difference there between a perceived expectation and a real expectation, to be building that house where there's no foundation supporting it. And that's when the house comes crashing down.
100%. Yeah. And so for at least our Ontario listeners, and probably all of Canada as well, I think you can definitely take those 7 things and very easily map that onto how our curriculum is built. Science, right? You're creating, you're observing. Like that all ties in, I think, quite neatly with what you're saying, that we can bring play into what we view as our curriculum, and that it all ties together and it all relates very much.
So yeah, when children are engaged in play, which means it's freely chosen, they can quit when they're done, the process is more important than the product. People who know what they're looking for, i.e. teachers, in theory, would be able to then translate the organic play that they see unfolding and meet those expectations that might be out there, right? So we're not saying that we're not meeting standards. We're not saying that we're not, meeting goals and objectives. What I am saying, though, is that you can meet all of those expectations by allowing quote unquote children to be engaged in play. To interrupt that then play, to maybe come to the table to do some kind of small group work or some kind of direct instruction, that can still be done in a playful manner, right? But we need to be mindful of not necessarily labeling it as play, because, unless the kid said, hey, I want to come to the table and let you ask me what is 2 + 4, that's not play.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just thinking about how with our curriculum, let's take again the example of science. Our curriculum says that children should be exposed to the growth cycle of plants. Well, nowhere in the curriculum is the word worksheet used, or the words sitting down and engaging in rote repetition. So I just find it really interesting that oftentimes once we get to first grade, we'll kind of back away from play as the primary form of learning and turn to worksheets. Yet there's nothing legally telling us that we have to sit down and do worksheets.
And that's that perceived expectation that I was mentioning. One of the things I like to ask is, what page is that on? Where is it actually written that you can't, I don't want to say just as in it's somehow below, but to watch the cycle, to watch it, to either plant something, to get an animal and watch the life cycle, whatever that might be. If it doesn't actually say you must now sit them down at the table and do these worksheets, then that means you either think that's what you should be doing, or that's what you saw somebody doing at some point. But if I pushed you and said, where did that expectation come from? Chances are you would be hard pressed, because the answer is, I don't know. And to me, that's very scary. I really believe very strongly that everybody in this field, regardless of the age group that they work with, should be able to identify what they're doing and why they're doing it and who they're doing it for. Definitely.
That's a very good point, right? Where are we getting the idea of the worksheet? And I do think sometimes it's, well, my mom was a teacher,
Uh-huh.
30 years ago, and that's how she did it, or that's what I see the teacher across the hall doing, so
Yes.
I'm going to do that.
But it concerns me that people working with young children then become either doormats or sheep, right? Now we're following somebody without really having any true intention or direction, right? I mean, that's very scary.
Definitely.
The answer, what are you doing? Those are my 3 favorite questions. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? And who is it for? And if I was mentoring you as a teacher and I asked you those questions, it's never to test you. It's never to trick you. It's to kind of engage in a little check and balance as to the level of intention that you're bringing to your work. Because if you said to me, I do not know why I'm doing that, I would not let you continue the behavior until you had some kind of rationale.
And I love that it can hold ourselves accountable for
100%.
our choices and our actions.
Why are you doing that? Well, that's just the way we've always done it. That is dangerous thinking for 99 different reasons, none of which are probably appropriate to this podcast. but it's not. That is dangerous old school thinking. And I use a soup analogy, and I'm probably derailing you, and so I apologize in advance. So I use a soup analogy, and I'll make it very quick. The idea that everybody can cook some soup. And I'm probably speaking specifically to maybe what I would call maybe the matriarchs in our industry, you know, the women who've been doing it for a while, who are sometimes, not always, but can sometimes be very resistant to trying something new. And so I say to them that their soup, they've always made soup. Their soup was good. Their soup was nourishing. But we've learned a lot about how soup should be made, right? We've learned that sometimes our soup had too much salt, or our soup didn't have enough spice, or we could put some protein in our soup. So nobody's saying your soup is bad. What we are saying, though, is that there's evidence that shows that our soup should look a little different than the way that you maybe were trained on how to make soup. And sometimes the soup analogy works.
Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. And something else that I want to kind of touch on a little bit relating to that is personally, I am teaching grade 1 right now, and then I know some of our listeners are going to be primary educators. So in Canada, that's grades 1 to 3, and then we have kindergarten as well. And something I'm noticing is that in kindergarten, there is a big push. It's really important that we have play-based learning, that children are learning through play, that we are honoring all their domains of development, that learning is holistic. It's written into, we don't have a kindergarten curriculum anymore. It's called the kindergarten program in Ontario. And so you have these 5 and 6-year-olds who their educators are saying, you know, these kids need play. They have to learn through play. But then 2 months goes by, and in September they're in grade 1, and then it's unfortunately in many cases a lot of, okay, play stops now we have to do the real work, we don't have time to play. And so I'm wondering what you think about that, how developmentally appropriate practice can go from play-based learning to sit down and work now in the matter of 2 months.
Exactly. It's like they have a switch.
Yeah.
Right? Like, oh, yeah, let's switch it off now. So, okay, so back up. Let's take 2 steps back really quick and make some definitions.
Sure.
So early childhood education. And I realize that in the States and in Canada, we use the phrase early childhood educators a little differently, but I don't want to get bogged down with that. I want to talk about like the definition, the lifespan definition of what the age range of early childhood is. Okay. Birth to age 8. So that right there, if birth to age 8 is early childhood, and we know that children in this developmental range need to be playing, and that we are learning how to link their play back to the domains not only of developmentally appropriate practice, cognitive, language and literacy, social, emotional, and physical, but also to the various expectations by the province or the district that you might be in, it doesn't make any sense. Because 0 to 8, right? So whether they're 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, it doesn't matter. They're not exempt from DAP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it kind of goes back a little bit to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago about that the teacher's perception of how to teach a grade 1, grade 2 is different than what really actually can be happening.
Mm-hmm. I almost wonder if sometimes it's a little easier to whip out a worksheet
Of course it is.
than it
It's
is.
easier to have a worksheet. Sorry. It's easier to have a worksheet. It's easier to have a chopped up 20-minute schedule. It's easier to have 40 rules on the wall. But it's only easy because it's allowing the adult to not have to think, to not have to create connections, to not have to be actually paying attention to what is actually unfolding in front of them. And that's the piece that scares me. The
Mm-hmm.
differentiated instruction is not hard unless you're a control freak. If you
Mm-hmm.
want everything done your way, it's going to be very, very, very tricky for you to, one, be developmentally appropriate, and two, to be engaged in play.
Mm-hmm. And
Right?
yeah.
So they're trying to build a house, in theory, where there's maybe not a foundation. Because what I know is that if the foundation is strong, then you can start building. And 1 year of bad teaching that's fine. Like in the big grand, like the big barrel of school, 1 or 2 years of bad teaching is not necessarily going to kill you. What I get very concerned about is that when the early years are done, what's the word I'm looking for? Not in a developmentally appropriate passion, and we poison the well from day one. Like that so concerns me.
And I definitely, I can't remember where I heard this quote, but it's that oftentimes you'll see smiles disappear from school photos by the time a child reaches fifth grade. And I
That's
almost
interesting.
wonder
If it's sooner.
but the phasing out of joyful, playful learning could maybe relate to this sort of disdain and dislike for the school environment.
And the crime in that is that children are innately curious. They want to explore the world around them. They want to discover stuff. We approach learning and education as though it's a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And because we have forgotten that children innately, they're hardwired to want to figure out their world. And we've made it the institutionalization of education, I think, is what is undermining it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if that makes sense, but Bev Boz, rest in peace, Bev Boz, an American educator that I'm sure some of your listeners might be familiar with her and her
Mm-hmm.
work. She used to say that how awesome would it be if children ran into school every morning after getting off the bus the same way that they run out of the school in the afternoon.
And that's a lovely idea. And I hope that's something that we can strive for, especially as we return to school after everything gets back to normal, hopefully, that how can we make our schools as a whole a place that children are running to,
yes,
as opposed to running from. And I wonder,
go on.
And I wonder if playful and joyful learning is something that would be
100%. I think simply, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, by asking the 3 questions of what am I doing and why am I doing it and who is it for, I really honestly believe that assists us in staying calibrated to not only best practice and play, but of making relationships and connections. I mean, that's all children want from us. That's all what they wanted before COVID. That's all what they wanted during. That's all they're going to want after is those connections. And play is such an authentic, organic way for that to happen. It concerns me that too many people still right now in 2020 think that playing and learning are 2 separate things. And you know that's not true. I know that's not true. I'm guessing probably most of your listeners realize that it's not true. However, some people in decision-making capacity still think that, if you're enjoying yourself, you must not be learning anything. Yet what we know is that the only way you are going to ever learn anything is if you're actually invested and engaged in the topic.
Exactly. That's great. Now, people who are listening and are maybe thinking like, oh my gosh, like I use worksheets or I don't make a lot of time for play in my day. Do I have to just completely change everything I'm doing and drop everything right away? How would you suggest people work towards creating more of a play-based learning environment? What steps do you think someone should take?
Well, this is going to sound self-serving, but I want you to read my playbook. Start with the playbook. No, but for real, and I mean that because, first of all, I write the way that I speak. So even though I think the book is very content-rich and reference-rich, I write the way that I speak. So it's easy to swallow, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the questions at the end of each chapter allow people to do a little bit of self-reflection, or perhaps even maybe a school-wide reflection. Where are we on the continuum of having time every day to do these initial 7 things? Where even if creating right now is on Friday afternoons, I drag the easel out. Okay, it's a starting spot. So how can we now maybe get the easel out, or art or creative expression or dance or music or whatever that might look like? How can we start plopping that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday? Baby steps. I mean, I'm going to meet you where you are, but I want to see growth. But I want to see some taking another step, take another step, take another step. Drifting away from what we know to be best practice. Everybody does that. Anybody who says they've never drifted is lying to you. And anybody who knows me will say, I'm very patient with you. Not patient, I'm understanding, because we've all drifted. Where I get frustrated is when people choose to stay there because the worksheets are easier, where the rule sheets are easier, where the 20-minute time blocks, it's time to transition to something else. It's easier because I'm not having to think. I'm not having to actually meet you where you are and provide for you what you need in this space. Mm-hmm. That's where I get frustrated. So do a little audit. How am I making time every day to create, move, sing, discuss, observe, and read? And remember that all of that comes back to play. And then read the second book.
I have, for our listeners, I have read Lisa Murphy on Play, and I agree that it is written the way you speak. So it's like it's not like hauling out a textbook and trying to okay, starting on this chapter and slowly working through it. It's like you're listening to a friend speak.
Thank you.
And they're giving insightful opinions and perspectives, but they're also backing it up with research.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that's great. And I'll make sure to have a link so that people can check out the book. And I believe it's available through Red Leaf Press, right?
It is, but there's also a Canadian distributor. I believe it's called Login, Login
Yes.
Canada. Login Canada has it. So then you're paying, one, it's in Canadian dollars, but two, then the shipping, and there's no customs, and it's a lot easier process for your Canadian listeners, for sure.
Yeah, I'll add that link as well. That's how I got the book, and it didn't take too long to come in. But what you were saying about kind of reading it on your own or as a team, I could definitely see the benefit in a childcare center, or even like a kindergarten team or grade 1-2 team, taking the book and then working through it together as sort of like a book study to reflect upon your practice, maybe as like a professional learning community experience.
And although that wasn't, of course, out the gate an intention, through the years, that is what I've been told so many programs ended up doing. And it is a textbook in quite a few colleges.
Okay.
I think because of that, again, didn't go out to write the book to want it to be a textbook. It was, a couple happy accidents along the way. There are many childcares who use the 7 things as like their lesson planning model.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And I talk about that in the book. It's almost like a reverse lesson planning. At the end of every day, instead of spending, 2 weekends every month lesson plan the future, we spend a few minutes at the end of every day thinking about, okay, what did I see today? How did we observe? How did we create? How did we move? How did we discuss? How did we sing? Where did I start linking some of the quote unquote learning with the playing? And it's then, what do I need to make sure is available tomorrow? What do I need to maybe redirect tomorrow? What do I need to add to for tomorrow? And it's very, one, I think it's more authentic. 2, it's less stressful for the adult in the room. The one thing, though, I would like to say, and I am aware of the time, but I do want to point out for your listeners, especially if they're new to me, just a little teaser that being play-based and child-centered does not mean that the kids are running around naked with paint flying through the air like Lord of the Flies, in room 6. And I go into that a little bit more in the other book number 5, the more recent book that just came out. But I will share this with your listeners, that the secret, honestly, to good teaching, and I would argue good parenting, is controlling the environment instead of the children in it.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And you do touch on that in the book. And I think that's something that maybe sometimes people worry about is, if I let them play, we're going to have paint on the ceiling and someone's going to end up naked. But there's ways to make sure that everything is, safe and semi-contained to an extent.
Well, I think that often is the reaction because the kids, they don't know when they're ever going to see the easel ever again. So they do freak out when you bring it out. And I mean, if that's the one thing that I can get people to really start to believe in, and you're taking it on faith, because until you actually see it with your own eyeballs, it's hard to actually believe. But if you bring the easel out every day, they calm down.
Yes.
But if you bring the easel out only every other Wednesday when you're in a good mood, it's always going to be like the special treat, right? So they freak out, and then you think, see, every time I bring the easel out, they go crazy.
Yeah.
But it's because you never bring the easel out.
100%. And I think we'll leave it off on there, Lisa. I'll make sure to provide links below to your website and to the Canadian and the American website as well for your book. So thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It was an honor to be invited.
And thank you for being my first guest. I was saying to Lisa before we started that she inspired me to try out doing a podcast, and I reached out to her and she was so kind to be willing to talk to me for a little bit.
Well, I'm honored, so thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa.
Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the Paragon of Play podcast. Please make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so that you'll be notified when future episodes of the podcast are uploaded.